Hello, and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And we're nearing the end of our conference breakdowns in the Power Six. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the more competitive conferences in the nation in the SEC. This conference is absolutely loaded. There's a lot to get into. So, Tim, you ready to go?
Let's run it.
As ready as you'll ever be to run it. So why don't you break
it.
down the SEC for us and what we got?
Yeah, so the SEC is a really interesting conference because of course you've got some of these you got a couple at the top there with the premier teams of college basketball with guys like the Auburn Tigers, who of course have been at the top pretty much the whole year, Kentucky Wildcats, who have had their ups and downs, but they have some really strong players that will always keep them in basically every game. And then you've got some teams that really can make some noise that mix up in the middle there. So we're going to do a lot of covering of these teams that can make some noise. So let's get into it.
Let's jump right into it with the Auburn Tigers. They're sitting at 26-4 right now. They're 14-3 leading SEC play with the best record in the conference. And they've had one of the best seasons in the country. They're led by Jabari Smith on the offensive end. He's looking to be a top pick in next year's draft. Walker Kessler is absolutely frightening. He's leading the nation in blocks. So you have those stars that can really give you buckets on any given night. And they're also deep in their bench. They have talent up and down the lineup. I mean, they've had a few slip ups, like as of late, they lost at Florida and they lost against Tennessee at home, but they're still a very dangerous team going into March.
Oh yeah, I mean this team, of course, like you said, is very balanced. So, and I think that's one of the key things to note about a lot of these elite teams in the country is regardless of your star plays, you got to have guys to back it up. And Auburn absolutely has that outside of Jabari Smith. Like you talked about with Walker Kessler being a complete monster on the boards, monster on the boards and in the paint with blocks per game. 4.6 is a terrifying number. So it's a huge addition for any team to have. But and of course, they're also a very good rebounding team as well. It helps with Walker Kessler averaging 8 a game, but they rebound well kind of throughout their lineup. So they're going to be a hard team to stop. You're right that they have had some slip ups. But I think they're beginning to turn some things around and try to get back to that really elite level play that they had for about 3/4 of the year.
Well, I mean, no team is perfect per se, just been like smooth sailing throughout the season. Yeah. Auburn kind of was until last week where they had their bumps in the road and half of their losses have come in the last week. Granted, they're still raring to go come the conference tournament. And then we're going to turn it over to the Kentucky Wildcats. They are right behind them. They're another dangerous team that doesn't really have any bad losses. All of their losses have come on the road. They finished undefeated at home, which is huge for them. Oscar Tshiebwe is just straight up a beast. He is a contender for National Play of the Year. Almost 17 points a game, and he's leading the country in rebounding and with 15.3 a game. He's making rebounding cool again, which I think is pretty awesome. Kentucky, they're not at full strength right now. They need Severe Wheeler and Ty Washington to get a little bit healthier for them to return at full strength. But even so, they are also a very dangerous team.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like Oscar Tshiebwe, I'm convinced that dude is just made of concrete because he is like impossible to move and control when he's going for it. That's what makes him such a force on the boards is he just gets wherever he wants to go. So yeah, they're a very solid offensive team. Like you said, is like they need to get back to 100% with some of those guys. But of course, you're going to be a pretty darn good rebounding team when you have a guy that averages 15 a game. But also around him, they've got some decent rebounders if he doesn't gobble it up first. But yeah, they're an overall solid shooting team, which is what helps them average 80 points a game. So a team that's good on offense and a team that's good on the boards is going to usually utilize pretty much all aspects of the game well to try to get their most efficient game out of them. So they've had some slip ups in the road, but when they're healthy, they are absolutely an extremely dangerous team.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And next up is one of the more hot teams in the SEC. They've won 8 of their last 9, and I'm talking about the Tennessee Volunteers. And led by Kennedy Chandler and Santiago Vescovi. This team can score on you anytime they want to. They've been rising up the rankings, and they have one of the biggest matchups in the country against Arkansas on Saturday. So that'll be a very big game in deciding the fate of the conference, at least seeding for the SEC tournament.
Yeah, no kidding. They've got a pretty balanced team. One of the things is they're not always the most high-powered offense. It kind of depends game in and game out. But they're very solid in the defensive department, where they average over 9.5 steals per game. So that defense really helps them shake things up. A relatively solid shooting team and a pretty good rebounding team. They're overall pretty balanced. And I think that's what's allowed them to have the success they've had this year. They definitely would like to capitalize on winning that last really key matchup heading into the conference tournament to end the regular season on a high note. But I like what I see out of them in terms of their balanced offense and with guys that kind of are their stars and supporting roles as well. So they're always going to be a team to watch out for in any given game.
Yeah, the Vols have a ton of talent, and they are one of the hotter teams in this conference, but they're not nearly as hot as Arkansas has been. I mean, my God, they are the hottest
Arkansas's been killing it
in the country right now. They've won 14 of their last 15 games in the SEC, no less. I mean, before that, they had lost 5 of 6. But then when you go on to win 14 of 15 games, it's fair to say that that's been corrected in a big way. JD Note and Jalen Williams, they have both been fantastic, and their play has been a huge reason of why this team is so hot. Eric Musselman has this Razorbacks team hurtling towards March and playing some of the best basketball in the country, which is why that matchup at Tennessee will be so meteoric.
Yeah, no kidding, because like this team has they've been slapping around teams left and right in these last 5 or 6 games with teams that realistically going into that they were not expected to beat or even be in the game, but they've been one of the big surprises. They've been one of the big surprises out of the SEC this year. And it all depends, I think, for me, is what version of this team are you going to get? Because they have won with both versions. Are they going to be the high-powered offense that sacrifices some on the defensive end to keep the game going and get as many offensive possessions as they can? Or are they going to be the lockdown defensive team that just tries to keep you to as much points and score enough to beat you?
Well, I think that makes them even more dangerous, just because they
can do it both ways.
That can beat you in multiple ways, and that just creates problems for anybody that they're playing.
Yeah. It's just all a matter of what version of their team shows up and can they put both sides of that game plan together. As if they're not defending the ball particularly well, can they have that high-powered offense that'll score them 80, 85 points a game to edge teams out?
Yeah, let's move on to a team that has been really, really confusing, in my opinion, the Alabama Crimson Tide. They have been so inconsistent as far as just their play. They have wins against Gonzaga, Baylor, Houston, Tennessee, and LSU, which are all rather impressive wins. But then they have bad losses against Texas A&M, Missouri, Memphis, Georgia, and you don't really know what you're going to get from this Alabama team. You have the best of both worlds. Alabama's even lost to some mid-major schools like Davidson and Iona. So it just depends on which version of Alabama is going to show up on any given night, because sometimes they look like a team that can go to the Final Four, and then the next night they look like they don't even deserve to make the tournament. So it's really interesting to watch the Crimson Tide play basketball.
Yeah, they're just a really confusing team, because on paper they look pretty fantastic in a lot of different ways. I mean, averaging 80 points a game and 39.5 rebounds per game, that's like fantastic. But then you look at some of their losses. Yeah, but then you look at some of their losses and like, yes, of course, Kentucky is a great team, but they put up 55 that game. And it's like sometimes it's like, yeah, and that's the thing, is they're an all or nothing team. It's either they're fantastic or they're like, what in the world happened? And that's what I think is like, what version of this team are you going to get? They absolutely have the ability to upset quite literally anybody, not only in their conference, but almost anybody in college basketball, as they've shown throughout this year with some of their wins. It's just a matter of whether that consistency is going to come back to bite them, because I mean, it came back to bite them in significantly less important situations. Are they going to be able to turn that on, that switch, that sense of urgency to keep that offense and defense on like that high powered setting where they're playing their best basketball?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And it's hard to mark what these wild cards are. And when it comes to the Crimson Tide,
I don't know whether to call the Crimson Tide like a dark horse or whether or not they should be in the upper echelon, because like they're a team with the talent to play with the best of them, but their record certainly doesn't necessarily show it.
Well, I think we do know that we can call them a wild card.
Yeah, wild indeed.
Yeah. After that, we're going to go to Gainesville and take a look at the Gators. And the Gators are an interesting team where Florida is on the outside looking in still. They are either just on the bubble, they're an 11 seed, or a lot of people have them as the last four in. So that really creates a sense of urgency for this Florida team. And they have one more home game against Kentucky. And how they play in that game, it's going to be monumental in determining their fate the rest of the way.
Yeah, because this team, like you talk about inconsistency as well, they've shown that they can surprise you at times. Obviously, they were the ones to upset Auburn by one, while Auburn was second in the country at the time. But they've once again also had some pretty iffy losses. They're overall pretty solid team. They go deep into their bench. It's just a matter of, are they going to be able to put the pieces together? Because the pieces are absolutely there. And I will say some of it kind of does depend on some, I would call, luck side from the other team. Like, is the other team just having a bad day? Because I do believe that some of their win over Auburn was kind of just Auburn having a bad day. But
when it comes to luck, there's a stat for that. You don't think it can be measured, but KenPom,
they find a way.
Yeah, KenPom would beg to differ. But yeah, Florida is definitely an interesting team that their fate in terms of the NCAA tournament is going to be decided in the coming weeks. And now we'll go to LSU, look at the Tigers, and you shake your head because they're 20-10, they're sub 500 in conference play, and then they're a 7 seed. Why? Okay, they have won 15 out of 16 to start the season with wins at Wake Forest, against Kentucky, against Tennessee. And quite frankly, that's why they are in the position that they're in.
Yeah.
And then they got hurt a little bit. They lost 6 of 7 directly after, with 5 of those losses coming in the SEC, but they have been banged up for most of the second half. And when trying to, sort where this LSU team falls, the selection committee looks at the healthy LSU team that won 15 out of 16 to start the season, more so of the injured, banged up LSU team that has dropped a lot of their recent games and been really, really inconsistent. So looking at LSU, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, because they're a team that has definitely been like that tale of two halves of their season. Because you talk about 12-0 to start the season, won 14 out of their first 15 or whatnot. And they had a fantastic start to the season. They were looking like a great team. They were top 25 at the time. And like you said, injuries have kind of plagued them for the second half. But I think part of the reason that they are in the position they are seeding wise, or projected seeding wise, is you look at a lot of the teams that they've lost to in the second half with them being banged up. There is not too many that you could call truly like really bad losses, because they've obviously they have a very difficult schedule in terms of obviously the SEC being the SEC, but the teams that they've played, the teams they've played twice, they don't really have too many bad losses, and I think that's what leaves them up there with the amount of statement wins that they do have that came from some of that first half of the season.
Context absolutely matters in this situation, and when it comes to LSU, they're definitely reading in between the lines.
Yeah.
After that, let's look at a team that's been really quietly emerging onto the bubble in Texas A&M. Now, they have been in bubble watch conversation like quietly. We haven't really mentioned them, so to speak, in like the last month or so. But then they've been emerging. They're 19-11. They're 8-9 in conference play, which in a very, very stacked SEC, not bad at all. I mean, they have wins over Arkansas. They have wins over Notre Dame. They have a win over Florida. And A&M is looking like a dark horse as of right now.
Yeah, I mean, they just came off their most recent win against Alabama. They're playing pretty good basketball right now. Thankfully, they turned it around when they needed to, because after dropping 8 straight from January, like mid-January to mid-February, they were looking like they were in a really, really bad spot. But then
that'll do it.
But they've won 4 out of their last 5, including like I said, their last win being over Alabama. So they have their one more game at the end of this week in the regular season. If they can end that one on the high note with the win and then put it together a relatively solid SEC tournament, they definitely have the ability to squeak in. And that's
they have a lot of work to do, but yes. Is it possible? Stranger things definitely have happened.
You absolutely cannot count them out yet, given the turnaround that they've had and the current record they're setting out with the wins that they do have. But you're absolutely right that they definitely need to do more. They're not in yet.
Mm-hmm. Now let's take a look at South Carolina and the Gamers. They are incredibly unique because of how their rotation plays out. They roll
one of the weirdest ones I've ever seen in terms of a
Tim, you want to explain
major college basketball team.
Yeah, Tim, why don't you explain it?
They're so weird, because you talk about a lot of teams, like some of the shorter end teams, they'll run like 6, 7, maybe 8 guys that they really trust. Well, take South Carolina in terms of 10 minutes a game or more, which is, I mean, you play 10 minutes in a game, you've come in and out a couple of times.
It's a quarter of the game.
Yeah, it's a quarter of the game. You've played some decent times. They have 12 guys that do that on a consistent basis. 12. So it's like, is it just they're so balanced in talent level where they trust all those guys, or is it just a coaching style that wants to keep their guys moving around?
Lack of a true superstar.
And that is something that I think you can definitely attribute to the way that South Carolina functions, because Jermaine Cuisinart at 11.8 points per game is their points per game leader. And other than that, they've got 3 guys that are around that 10 mark, and everybody else kind of starts stacking down from there. So they're not a bad offensive team. They're just extremely balanced, with no real superstar playmakers that can bring them up to that upper echelon of offense. But they haven't been a bad team. They're currently sitting at 18-11 at 5th in the SEC, and they've won 5 out of their last 6 games. So they've put themselves in a decent situation to be knocking on the door a little bit. But they're another team that's kind of on the outside looking in, where they need to put together a very solid SEC tournament, if not win the dang thing, to confirm themselves with a spot in the NCAA tournament.
Well, it certainly would be nice if any of these teams won the dang thing. And guess what?
I'm sure
we're going to predict just that. Who will win the dang thing in the SEC, Tim?
You know, it's tough, because this one is obviously a very, very good conference in terms of like the upper echelon and the teams I mean, well, you know, the teams that have the ability, you look at all these conferences and the teams that kind of have the ability to beat at anybody at any given day. But with this conference, there's quite a few of them. But at the end of the day, in terms of complete team, I think the team that has the ability to win the right parts of the game to come out on top, I actually have to give this one to Kentucky. I think if Kentucky and Auburn meet in the championship game, I do believe that the front court presence and dominance of Oscar Tshiebwe and Kentucky will be able to outmatch the front court of Auburn, and have the ability to sort of edge out that side of the game, what I believe is going to be such a crucial part of the game, despite the fact that, of course, like Auburn having Walker Kessler and whatnot, I don't think he's going to be able to get that kind of defensive effect, and especially not those block numbers guarding Oscar Tshiebwe. So I have to go with the Wildcats here.
Yeah, this is a really interesting conference to look at because of how deep they run and how top heavy they are. You have Auburn and Kentucky, who you just mentioned, and then there's Tennessee that could also make some noise. But those three are not the hottest team in this conference right now.
Yeah.
And what I look at is who's playing the best basketball at the right time. So, Tim, I'm going to shake things up a little bit. The Arkansas Razorbacks are winning the SEC tournament. And when it comes to playing basketball at the right time, you can't ignore 14 wins in your last 15 games. You can't. And they're doing it the right way. And they're winning in multiple ways, and they're running through the SEC gauntlet almost untouched. JD Note and Jalen Williams are leading the pack, and I'm going Woo Pig Sooie into Tampa, and they're going to win the SEC tournament.
I mean, yeah, it's like you said, it's 100% a possibility, especially with the way their team has been playing lately. And the one thing that's absolutely to their credit is against a lot of these better teams, they have been winning the close games. And that's what's allowed them to win 14 of their last 15 is they have been handling their business when it gets close towards the end. So they're a fun team to watch, and especially the way they've been stomping through a lot of these teams in the second half of the season. So they'll absolutely be set to make some noise in the tournament.
Yeah, that's all we got for the SEC. We're going to wrap up our Power 6 conference breakdowns with we're saving the best for last. Tim, we're taking a trip to the Big Ten, and I know you're looking forward to that one.
More than excited.
So I hope you've enjoyed this ride that we've been on. The train ain't slowing down, though. We got content for you all March. When it comes to college basketball, we can't wait to bring it to you. But until next time, like and subscribe for more Running the Table content, and we out.